Welcome to the Brass and Woodwind Shop. Last week I took apart this cornet, and this week I'm going to clean it and polish it. I'm going to start by putting it in the chemicals. This instrument is very old, so I'm going to put it in the chemicals for a very short period of time. The chemicals are made to clean out the lime deposits on the inside of the instrument. The water that gets inside of it is mostly condensation and it evaporates away. But there is a little bit of other stuff that gets into there, and that stuff does not evaporate away. So when the water evaporates, it leaves the deposits behind. The chemicals are made to clean out those deposits that get hardened inside of the instrument. A lot of people wonder if the chemicals eat away at the brass on the instrument too, and the answer is a tiny little bit. It mostly eats away at the junk inside of the instrument, but it does also take away a tiny little bit of brass. So I am very careful when I chem clean an instrument, especially on an older instrument. I'm going to leave that in the chemicals for a very short period of time. Usually I leave an instrument in the chemicals for about 10 minutes, but in this case I'm probably only going to leave it in there for about 2 or 3 minutes. I have a bucket that I put the parts into. It has holes to let the chemicals drain out of it. Not all of the parts go into the chemicals though. Springs do not go into the chemicals, but I'm going to replace these springs so that really doesn't matter. And then the water key spring will not go in there. I believe this is the original water key spring. It's a very old spring, but it's still in good condition, so I'm just going to keep that one. The chemicals eat away at the metals on the springs, so that's why I do not put those in there. And then the interesting double water key, that goes in there. When I put the parts in, I put the tubes so they're facing up so that the chemicals can get inside of there better. This one, well, that's hard to put up because no matter which way you put it, it's upside down. So I'm just going to have to turn that around to get the chemicals inside the tubing on this one. And then the valves also need to point up. These valves are hollow. You can see that if you look in there, there's a little hole. And the reason for that hole is the valves are hollow. When you push the valve down, the air can go in and out of there so that it doesn't make a sucking sound in the casing while it's being used. Usually finger buttons cannot go in the chemicals because the chemicals eat away at the pearl on the finger buttons, but these ones do not have a pearl on them, so those ones can go in. Valve stems usually cannot go into chemicals because they're mostly made out of an aluminum alloy now, but these are just brass with silver plating on it, so those can go in there. And then this is the second valve slide that came apart when I pulled it apart. There's a lot of dust on this instrument. It's probably been sitting out for many, many years, so I'm going to get that dust off of there real quick. I'm just wiping that off because I do not want the dust clogging up my chemicals. If you get a lot of dust and other junk in there, they don't last as long. One time I did an experiment. I was wondering how much metal got eaten by the chemicals, so I put a lead pipe in the chemicals for about 6 months. And after about 6 months, there was some metal gone, but most of it was still there. So I know that the chemicals can dissolve the metal, but it takes a very, very long time for that to happen. So in the course of a few minutes, it does like almost no damage at all. But the chemicals do eat away at the lacquer a lot faster though. If you leave it in for about 10 minutes, usually you're fine. But if you forget a lacquered instrument in the chemicals for an hour or so, it will eat away at the lacquer. Here's my tank of chemicals. I'm putting the parts in there. And then the C lead pipe, I have to put that in there and turn it around. Otherwise there will be air trapped in there. And same thing with the cornet. I dip that in there and then turn that around to let out the bubbles. I have a little hook that I put it on. And I'm going to leave it in there for just a couple minutes and then take it out and clean it. Then the valve slides, I turn those around too to let out the chemicals. Then I'm going to take my trumpet cleaning snake and clean out the inside. While I'm cleaning this out, I'll tell you a little bit about the chemicals. The chemical that I'm using is called phosphoric acid, and it's sold by Furries and Allied. However, I think they only sell it inside the United States. I do not know where to get it outside of the United States. The chemicals are fairly expensive and they take up a lot of space, so I do not recommend that you get them unless you're going to be doing a lot of instrument repairs and cleaning. Leave that to the music store to get the chemicals. And now I'm going to pull out the cornet, and again I need to turn it around to let out the chemicals that are trapped in there. The phosphoric acid does not do anything for the black tarnish that's on the instrument. I'm going to address that when I do the next chemicals, and I'll show you that as soon as I'm done cleaning this. I'm using the cleaning snake to clean up all the junk, and then I put some water through and clean up the junk that's in there. I also have a brush that I use to clean up inside the tuning sides. Then I have a larger brush that I use for the inside of the casings. As you can tell, this is a very dirty job when you're cleaning old silver-plated instruments. Now I'm going to look at all the parts and see if they're still dirty and need to be cleaned again. If they're clean, then I put them off to the side. If they're dirty and need to be cleaned a second time, I put them in the bucket. I think that looks good. Valves are still dirty. There's a lot of buildup inside the ports, so those need to get redone. That looks good. There's still a lot of junk in the bottom valve caps. The bottom valve caps tend to harbor a lot of junk in them, so usually those need to be done a second time. These are all the parts that were dirty and need to be done again, and also the C crook. So I'll leave those in there for a few more minutes. It's a few minutes later and the parts are ready to come out again. After the second time, the only things that are dirty are the valves and the lower valve caps. So those will go in a third time. And also my hands are dirty, but I'll wash those up later. I'm done with the phosphoric acid. Now I'm going to use the silver dip, and I'm going to put that in there. And you should only need to put it in there for a few seconds to get it to do what it's supposed to. But since the tarnish was so thick on it, let's see how that's going to come off. I think I'm going to need to leave it in there a little bit longer. And if you move it around as you're dipping it, that helps too. So it's not something you just set in there and walk away and leave. So I'm going to agitate that a bit in the chemicals. Well, it looks like it's coming off pretty good. There is some of the deep black stuff there. It looks like that's coming off though. I think this will probably do the job. I have used the silver dip a lot, but I don't think I've ever used it on an instrument that's quite this tarnished. So it looks good. I think I may be able to finish it up with the polishing cloth. So I think that's probably good. So I'm going to take this part out and the crook. And again, I need to turn it around to get out all of the chemicals. This stuff is very expensive and I don't want to lose part of it down the drain. And I have the rest of the parts in the bucket. This silver polish is very expensive, and that's why I only have a few gallons of it. It would be extremely expensive to fill up a large tank with this. And also environmentally, this is probably not the best stuff too. So I just have a little bit and it works. If I have a larger item like a baritone that I need to clean, what I do is I take a cup and then I will pour it over the instrument, and that works too. I know you cannot smell on the video, but this stuff really stinks too. And when you open up the lid, you can smell it throughout the whole shop. I think this looks pretty good. I probably should be able to finish it up with the polishing cloth with no problem. Then I have to turn this around to make sure that all of the chemicals come out of all of the tuning sides. Okay, that's probably good. I'm going to do the same thing with the silver polish that I did with the phosphoric acid. Clean it off. Just rinse off all the parts. And then I'm going to clean out all the tubes and the valves and everything. Then I'm going to use the trumpet cleaning snake to get around all the curves on this thing. Washed out the inside of the parts and of the cornet to get all the water out of there. Now I'm ready to take this back to the bench and dry it up. Drying off the parts is very easy. I just take an old t-shirt and dry them. And to get inside the tubes, I have a flute cleaning rod. I put some cheesecloth on it, and then I just clean up the inside of the slide tubes. And that's all there is to drying the parts. You can see that it looks a lot better than it did. It's still not that shiny, but it's a lot better than it was. Now I have to do all the rest of the parts too. I got the cornet and all the parts dry. Now it's time to polish. For silver polish, I use Tarnish Shield. It works very well. You can also use Haggerty's or Silvo. And then I use a cloth. This is like a medical cloth, but it's used in band instrument repair too for polishing. And what I do is I rip a strip off, and then I take the silver polish and put some on the cloth. You don't need that much. That's too much. I'm going to put some back. And then you distribute it around the cloth. This is a wooden assembly mandrel, and I use that to hold the instrument while I'm working on it. It holds it out in the open. It makes it a lot easier to work on. So I'm going to hold it here. Then I'm going to polish it with this cloth. The silver polish polishes the instrument without damaging it at all. It really does not take off any of the silver. It just takes off the tarnish on there. And when I'm working on old instruments, I'm very careful not to do any damage to them, because I figure that sometime, several years down the road, people can work on them later. But if I do the damage now, then the damage is done forever. So I like to make sure that it's done right without doing too much work that's not necessary. They say that on old coins to not polish them, because that can ruin them. It's not the same with instruments. Polishing an instrument does not ruin it at all. It only ruins it if you take off metal. Now if I were to buff this, that would take off some silver plating, and that would be bad to do to this instrument. But just this type of polishing does not hurt it at all. And actually it helps it because it keeps off that really dark black tarnish on there. I also have a funny story to tell you while I'm polishing. I mentioned a few minutes ago in the video that the silver polish really stinks, the liquid stuff, and that was last night when I was working on the instrument. Shortly after that, I got a knock on my door, and the lady from the apartment next door said that, that something really stinks, and she said, "Is everything okay here?" And I said, "Yes, that's just my silver polish. Sorry about the stink." So anyway, it really does stink. So I'm just going to keep polishing this until it's done. And I will have to repolish this after I'm done working on the instrument, but it's a lot easier to polish it now when it's apart than it is to polish it when everything is together. So I'm going to do it now, and then I'm going to have to touch it up later. But that's going to be a very simple polish. I'll probably just do it with a polishing cloth. It'll just take a couple minutes to do it then. This job does take a while. I'm probably looking at about a half an hour to polish this, just because there are so many little holes and different crevices on this thing in between the valves. So it's going to take me a while to do. So I am not going to make you watch me do the whole thing. I'll just let you know that I am going to polish the cornet, and then I'm also going to polish the other parts too that are silver plated. So I've polished the instrument, or at least for the first time, and like I say, we'll need to go over it again. It did turn out pretty good. There is some of the really dark black right here, you can see some of it, but that's over the brass and not over the silver plating in a lot of those places. So this is probably about as good as it's going to get. And actually it's pretty good overall. And one more thing, there were some places where there was solder that had been done sometime in the past, like right there, and that turned black too, and there's not a lot I can do about that other than cleaning up the solder, but cleaning up the solder, sometimes it ruins the plating, so I'm just going to leave that. And there will be a few black spots on here, but it's a lot better than it was, and if I were to take care of all of those black spots, it would do further damage to the instrument, so I'm just going to leave that. Now I'm going to polish the tuning slides. I have this to hold the slides, and I'm going to hold them there and polish these same way as I did the rest of the instrument. I finished polishing all of the parts, and I ended up breaking one of these cloths. That's okay, I got another one. And you can see that it gets very dirty when you polish, and also my hands are very dirty too. It is a very dirty job, but it makes the instrument look nice. It's not perfect, but it is a lot better than it was, and I'm going to touch it up again after I'm done. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please subscribe for more band instrument repair videos, and look in the description below for links to related videos.